Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Fun Ducks Histocast. I'm Catherine.
And I'm Sonia.
Today we'll be looking at some ongoing issues surrounding asylum seekers in the US before then looking at our recent heated topics surrounding Kanye West, the Twitter takeover of Elon Musk, and free speech.
According to News Nation, asylum seekers are ones who are, quote, looking for protection in fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a social group in their nation. In the United States, most asylum seekers come from Central and South America, and asylum-seeking rights are protected under United States laws ever since World War II. However, there is controversy over this acceptance of asylum seekers and the degree to which we do it as well as the process therein. The introduction of the Trump administration in 2017 brought great shifts to not only our asylum seeker but also refugee policies in the United States today. Around this time in the United States, there was a huge amount of stigma against immigrants and refugees, along with that asylum seekers, where these people were depicted very negatively, both in politics and socially, essentially vilifying them. I can remember looking back even on myself as a 10-year-old and seeing influences from the small amount of politics that I did absorb, that this was extremely negative, and I can remember my own, the negative influence around me, especially about refugees from the Middle East. So along with this, as Trump came into office, there was a lot of policy changes and efforts made to decrease immigration to the United States and allowance of asylum seekers.
On January 2019, for example, Trump placed the, quote, return to Mexico policy, which forces Central American asylum seekers to return to their homeland for an indefinite amount of time until approval of their claim. During this period, over 50,000 asylum seekers have been sent back to Mexico to wait for approval. And in recent years, with the introduction of COVID in 2020, policies surrounding asylum seekers have changed. Although there are no laws that can technically prohibit people from seeking protection and apply for asylums, the U.S. did enact policies that will make the asylum-seeking process incredibly difficult and places various policies that gives reasons to expelling asylum seekers from the U.S., such as the Title 42, a part of the Public Health Service Act of 1944, which prohibits people from entering the U.S. with the goal of stopping the transfer of communicable diseases in the U.S. This can immediately deny people's entries to the U.S., and since the enaction of this policy, Title 42 has been used at least 380,000 times to expel migrants at the southern border, even expelling many unaccompanied children. ACLU also writes that, quote, the policy has led to thousands of documented cases of violent attacks against individuals who the U.S. has expelled, including rape, torture, and abduction.
Despite other COVID policies having now been taken down or reduced, Title 42 still remains in full force, and while there have been various fights even just this year about whether or not it should be taken down, it's even gone to court and had a ruling, though the Biden administration is now sending an appeal about that decision. But let's look into what happens when these asylum seekers do arrive in the U.S. While the large majority now are immediately denied because of Title 42, some are allowed to go in and wait to go to immigration court. Now, while most are denied, some people are exempt from Title 42, and those do make up the majority of people that can come into the next step of the process. And these are usually people that Mexico will not accept because of their nationality, which includes Cubans, Venezuelans, and Ecuadorians. So these people are able to get past this barrier of Title 42 and make it to the next step, which is going to immigration court. So once in the United States, these asylum seekers either end up in an Immigration Customs Enforcement, or ICE, detention center, or under Alternatives to Detention, or ADT. A very small portion of people are just told to go to the court at a specific date rather than having to be put under this surveillance, but the number of people that are put under this is becoming increasingly lower as more and more people are ending up in ICE detention or under ADT surveillance. This surveillance is meant to ensure that the asylum seekers end up going to court on their assigned date. And there are two main methods that are used in ATD surveillance. One of which is using ankle monitors, which are currently, as of September, used to surveil nearly 41,000 people, and meanwhile there's another about 250,000 people which are instead of being surveilled through an app called SmartLink, which they essentially have to send selfies of themselves on certain days to verify that they are where they say they are, so that the courts can still be sure that they're going to show up. And while these methods may be successful in making sure that these asylum seekers get where they need to be, it's important to understand the effects that they have on the people that are subject to them. A 2021 survey published by the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law found that 90% of respondents experienced harm to their physical health due to their ankle monitors, such as aches, pains, excessive heat, or inflammation. Meanwhile, 20% had received electric shocks from the device.
Both of these methods reportedly also have some psychological backlash and overall enforce this idea that asylum seekers are inherently not trustworthy.
The Biden administration has seemed to be moving towards this idea of allowing more asylum seekers, and especially has been implementing more often than the IC detention this ATD surveillance. But at the same time, they are adding more requirements to this sort of plan. The Biden administration announced that it planned to introduce a home curfew program, which would require some immigrants to remain in their homes from 8 p.m. until 8 a.m., saying that it would be cheaper than mass incarceration. As a whole, asylum seekers are not trusted at all throughout their entire process. Even if they can get past Title 42, they're set with these obstacles of the ICE detentions, which are reportedly terrible places, as well as this ATD surveillance. And even if they get past that, the next big step for them is this immigration court. And it's important to acknowledge how big of a step this is, as it essentially determines whether or not they're able to stay in the United States, get help through another option, or are just sent back out of the country. And since immigration cases are adjudicated in civil courts, these people that are fighting the deportation and these asylum seekers aren't given appointed counsel by the government. They often don't have legal representation unless they can afford it. This brings the question of, should we be funding all of this money into keeping the asylum seekers in the United States through ATD or through detention, or should we be instead putting that money towards giving them representation in court and maybe making it more likely for them to want to go to those court dates if they have a higher chance of being able to get through? But, of course, to understand the controversy of Title 42 and the other policies put into place for asylum seekers, we have to understand, why do we have them? If we didn't have Title 42 in place, we'd have an even greater influx of asylum seekers. And while in 2020, this was especially put into place because of spreads of COVID, it has been believed by some that it hasn't actually done much in this case of stopping the spread of COVID-19 in the United States. But besides that, we would have even more asylum seekers coming into the United States, which may be a good thing, but at the same time, our court system, as well as the ICE detentions and the ATD program, are already overwhelmed and take a ton of funding. So there is the consideration of funding towards these programs and what would happen if we did have so many more asylum seekers coming past that stage. But also, let's try and acknowledge why we have these court processes. It seems like a lot to be surveilling these people with ATD and to be putting them into detention centers even just to make sure they show up to a court date. And it is important to acknowledge that sometimes these vetting systems are important. People can lie in interviews and along the process, and it's important that we are admitting people into the United States, I believe, that actually need to be here. We shouldn't be, I don't believe, in taking in asylum seekers that don't actually need to seek asylum.
And looking at the U.S. southern border today, the Biden administration is set to be making changes to the laws and caps on asylum seekers, and with many trying to rebuild the asylum-seeking admittance that we had pre-COVID and before the Trump administration. However, these policies can still rebound and come back very easily. In some cases, when refugee admittance is so low that some refugees are trying to get into the country by becoming asylum seekers. For example, some Ukrainians are going to Mexico during the Russia-Ukraine war in order to come into the U.S. as asylum seekers, especially since the refugee process is so slow and tedious. Therefore, there are worries that these policies will increase again with these quote-unquote pretend asylum seekers, especially with already the asylum frauds that we have seen and other common stereotypes against these asylum seekers, which makes it really difficult for the U.S. to accept large numbers of asylum seekers. So there are a lot of directions and unknowns that asylum-seeking policies can go.
So, as a whole, the current climate with asylum seekers brings about a lot of big questions that aren't always easy to answer. This idea of whether or not Title 42 should still be in effect, even with other COVID policies being taken out, and whether or not we really think that that's the right thing to do.
This is definitely a very complex problem, and personally, in one hand, I think that human rights is a very important issue, and this is why we established the asylum-seeking policy in the first place, is because in World War II and the Holocaust, there are so many abuses of human rights, which is why the U.S. are starting to accept them and to prevent them and providing them a safe space from all these atrocities that they're facing. But also, so what is the maximum amount that we can help with, and how do we make sure that all the people that come into the U.S. are people that need help, and they're just not taking resources away from those who are actually needing those support coming from the U.S., which is really, we need to achieve balance between those two.
I mean, to me, the thing that really struck me is that this whole Title 42 situation seems kind of contradictory. How are they taking down COVID policies and saying, oh, we don't need these COVID policies anymore, we don't need these mandates anymore, and yet aren't budging on Title 42? Right? They're having this whole fight about it, and even when Title 42 hasn't really been shown to do much for COVID, how are we still keeping this in effect? Is there some sort of other justification? There must be behind the scenes.
And I think it's just it's a cover-up for the fact that the U.S. wants less asylum seekers. It's not that they're really believing that this could decrease the amount of COVID cases in the nation. It's more like they're trying to use this as a way to limit the amount of people that are coming into the country.
Yeah, I mean, what really struck me, though, was this whole morals of the ICE detention and ATD surveillance. These stories of these people that have been put through having these ankle monitors, having to do this app, even just that, have had such effects on people physically and mentally that they remember these times, and even just doing the app are people that are saying that, even just doing this app is just like having the ankle monitors, and they feel trapped by it. And how can we take these people in that are facing this persecution, that are asking us for help, and say, we don't trust you, we don't believe in you, and we're going to put you through these circumstances that are just going to make you feel worse?
Exactly. So are we still even providing the safety and protection measures that we were said to provide for these people seeking refuge and escape from persecution? Are we even making this place a better place for them to be, or are we just putting people through a different form of persecution than they faced before? Guess what? It is time for our daily pun section. So, Sonia, we all know the golden rule of life, but what is the golden rule of social media?
Don't post your selfies and get scammed by people.
Well, good guess, but that's incorrect. The answer is tweet others the way you want to be tweeted.
Speaking of Twitter, now that we've talked a bit about asylum seekers in the United States today, let's transition to a more contemporary issue facing our nation in the media.
Recent years, as technology and social media advance, information spreads easily and reaches billions of people within seconds. This information, other than cute cat videos, also include things much more dangerous like hate speech and misinformation that can easily influence communities of people. However, who is controlling these powerful technologies and platforms that connect people around the world? Well, it turns out it could just be a single billionaire. Towards the end of October in 2022, Elon Musk took over Twitter after he spent $44 billion purchasing the company, making him the biggest shareholder. After his takeover, he fired the leader of the team that decided to block Trump's account on Twitter due to his instigation of violence. And before Musk, how Twitter decides which types of speech should be censored, like hate speech, was determined by a group of legal, policy, and trust committee. But now it is just him. And after his takeover, he lifted the ban of Donald Trump's account and several other blocked accounts due to their hate speech, spread of misinformation, and instigation of violence. And meanwhile, he also lifted their COVID-19 misinformation policy.
In reality, the government can only encourage private corporations to have policies against the spread of misinformation and hate speech, and actually can't enforce or require that to happen on the platforms due to the protection of free speech and our First Amendment rights. And Musk has used that to his advantage, and it was actually one of the main reasons he bought Twitter, because he considered the platform to be, quote, the town square of the internet, where everyone is free to share their thoughts. The New York Times wrote that before Elon Musk bought Twitter, slurs against Black Americans showed up on the social media service at an average of 1,282 times a day. After the billionaire became Twitter's owner, however, they jumped to 3,876 times a day. And slurs against gay men appeared on Twitter 2,506 times a day on average before Mr. Musk took over. Meanwhile, afterward, they rose to 3,964 times a day. And anti-Semitic posts referring to Jews or Judaism soared more than 61% in the 2 weeks after Mr. Musk acquired the site, end quote.
And with Musk's new policy, Twitter accounts can now be verified for just a price of $7.99 a month. QAnon, an extreme rightist conspiracy theory group who believes that the nation is run by a secret cabal of cannibalistic sexual child abusers and global sex traffickers who also worship Satan, is plotting against former President Donald Trump. And because they could afford $7.99 a month, the account is now verified on Twitter, despite the very sketchy conspiracies that they are sharing. It appears that Musk's new policies aren't really working to create the town square that he wished, but instead created a battlefield with crazy people. One of the recent examples is Kanye. Kanye West, an American rapper and fashion designer, recently went a little cray-cray and made various anti-Semitic and racist remarks, especially on social media. This all started on October 3rd when Kanye hosted his Yeezy's fashion show in Paris. And at the show, he and some models walked out with t-shirts that printed "White Lives Matter" on them. And when he was interviewed by Fox News show for the reason why he wore the White Lives Matter shirt, he says it's because, quote, they do, outright supporting the White Lives Matter campaign. The Southern Poverty Law Center explains that White Lives Matter campaign is, quote, dedicated to the promotion of the white race and taking action as a united voice against issues facing the black race, end quote. And the white supremacy ideologies that it is sharing also promotes hatred towards the Jewish population. Profiting out of the controversial message on the merchandise, regardless of the slogan print being fully for marketing purposes or if it is just a form of self-expression from Kanye, both results in the spread of this message due to the publicity that the product got and the support coming from a popular celebrity of this campaign.
Following this White Lives Matter incident, Kanye continued his controversy with his anti-Semitic comments on social media. On October 7th, rapper Diddy criticized Kanye for his t-shirt slogan, and later Kanye shared their text screenshot and captioned, quote, "I'ma use you as an example to show the Jewish people that told you to call me that no one can threaten or influence me," end quote. And the next day posted on Twitter that he wants to go, quote, DEFCON 3 on the Jewish people, end quote, which alludes to the military term DEFCON, which is used to illustrate the intensity of a national security threat. This has connotations that Kanye is either viewing the Jewish population as a big threat to him, or simply that he's going to inflict some sort of aggression towards them.
He was blocked on Twitter briefly and was quickly unblocked, making him make more anti-Semitic comments later, such as when he feeds into the stereotypes of the Jews being overly materialistic. And don't worry, things get worse from here. Just a couple weeks ago, in an interview with Alex Jones, Kanye remarks, quote, "I love Hitler," end quote. He tries to do a save and said, quote, "I love Jewish people, but I also love Nazis," end quote, which quite really don't go together, especially after his countless anti-Semitic remarks. He later proceeds to post on Twitter a photo of the swastika, leading to him being completely banned by Elon Musk on Twitter. But the question is, how did Kanye get this far with this hate speech? Well, for one reason, there is no governmental regulations on hate speech, making these wealthy billionaires have full control over the type of information that they want to have out there. And for Musk's purposes, he not only is a strong believer of all types of free speech in the media, but he can also simultaneously, by making these regulations and policies on Twitter, that he can profit from this because of the publicities of the tweets that the tweets received, and also the subscriptions of the Twitter Blue, such as when they're getting verified. Meanwhile, we see that because of this control and because of this increase in what free speech means, which includes on Twitter both hate speech and misinformation, it actually amplifies a lot of hate towards groups and a lot of, like, for example, the COVID-19 misinformation as well. Because we see that with anti-Semitism, in the case of Kanye, that anti-Semitism hate has risen like over 34% throughout the years. And because of social media and its wide reach, these hate are getting amplified because of the amount of people that these tweets can reach and these hashtags are reaching. And for example, the surges of the White Lives Matter campaign are gaining popularity on social media without violating any community standards, and people have been trying to find ways to get past those community standards, like on Twitter. So the supposed K-pop fans flooded Twitter and promoted the hashtag White Lives Matter to the number one trending topic on Twitter, and fooled the algorithm into thinking that it was a K-pop trend instead of a politics trend. And then under that hashtag, there were over 25,000 tweets in just 12 hours. Analysts from Voices of Youth writes that, quote, "Free speech is a double-edged sword to the public. Users may express negative opinions online, and it will be still considered as an act of exercising the freedom of speech. Positive opinions affect readers positively, while negative opinions do the opposite. Meanwhile, changing opinions, when presented with new information, should be a normal act to all people," end quote. This also means that when people are exposed to information such as hashtag White Lives Matter or Kanye's anti-Semitic comments, their opinions on the topic could also be influenced by what the internet and everyone else is saying. So therefore, in extreme cases, it would not only promote hate towards those groups of people, but it can also instigate violence, which is definitely something that we do not want to see.
I think that an important implication of the control of this information on Twitter is understanding that baseline, Twitter is a communication platform, right? It's extremely popular. I mean, otherwise, why would Elon Musk be paying billions of dollars to control it? And on Twitter, not only do people post things for fun, for entertainment, but people put genuine information out there. And this can have problems with, how are we able to really say that this information can be controlled by a singular person? Governments will put out information on Twitter to try and spread the word. What happens when we're starting to have regulations on genuine information that's being sent out? How can we understand what is being controlled by people at these private companies like Twitter when they might be censoring things or not censoring other things, when sometimes this platform can be important simply just for baseline communication? Another interesting thing to me is looking at this Kanye situation in specifics, right? We can see that celebrities have huge influence. I mean, someone as popular as Kanye, of course, will already have a huge audience, but other celebrities too often are out making political stances at the Oscars or stating their opinions on the internet. And to me, it's kind of do we really want to have celebrities making such big statements out on the internet? And I understand that they have their own freedom of speech and their own ability to express their ideas, but I think it's important to understand that celebrities have a huge influence. They have dedicated fan bases, they have huge audiences where their views will go out to, and sometimes when we're looking at someone like Kanye, they're kind of ignorant or even are spreading views that are genuinely hateful.
Exactly, and these social media platforms and the people that are on it are especially influential, which is why it brings the question, is like, this big of an influence and this impactful of a technology, should there be federal regulations on it? Because as we said in the beginning, that the government cannot technically influence any sorts of enforcements that force private companies to have community guidelines where they strongly prohibit hate speech and misinformation spread, because of our First Amendment right of the freedom of speech, which we definitely very value. But the thing is, when that freedom of speech is becoming a tool of aggression and a tool of possibly instigating violence, is that still free speech, and how should we actually control this? And I think it's definitely a very nuanced topic, because personally, coming from a country with a lot of censorship and that we don't have exposure to media where people can be very open about their government, because, well, I forgot to say which country I came from, China. Forgot to talk about that. But like, it's good that like in the U.S., I get to see the amount of freedom there is on the internet where people are free to share their thoughts, and despite that it might not agree with the majority of the people.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I mean, for me personally, growing up in the United States, having lived here my entire life, I've been pretty much raised on these values of freedom of speech, and it's been, really ingrained into my head from a young age. And seeing that online in the United States, that's challenged. I mean, freedom of speech has become such an important value to me and to myself as I've seen it used throughout my life.
But also, this freedom brings side effects, such as it is creating division in the country. And sometimes it may lead to attack on other people's values. And when it's to that degree, should the government enact federal regulations towards that? But we also don't want it to be a breach of our constitutional rights. So it's really a very nuanced topic that needs a balance between those two. But regardless of what has been said, I personally believe that the most baseline expectation that we should have for private companies is that one person should not be making all the decisions for what type of information gets to be seen. Because in the case of Elon Musk, he's a person who controls Twitter, and he is the one who decides all the types of information that gets let out. So although that we can't enforce governmental regulations on prohibiting all forms of free hate speech, we certainly, personally, I think that we shouldn't let one person have the control. And some ways that we may counter that is through doing what Twitter had been doing before Elon Musk, such as having a very strong and big legal and trust committee who is there to analyze these type of information, and then as a group decide which type of information should we have. So this is bringing out more of the democracy aspect that we have, and not just Elon Musk making all the decisions. And this is definitely not just a single solution to this problem. There are definitely more and possibly better ways to mitigate this issue surrounding our media platforms, which is why it is important for us as social media users and citizens of the US to be aware of the issues surrounding our media and be alert of the information that we're exposed to, so that we are not taking in hateful and misinformation and not spreading it as well. And because of our awareness, one day we could actually find a better definition for what free speech really means for our nation. Well, those weren't technically easy topics to talk about.
But they definitely are important. The government holds such different levels of power over these two different topics. When we look at asylum seekers, we see that their lives, once they come to the United States, if they even can, is determined by government policy. And whether it be for better or for worse, we're restricting that. And looking forward, we're going to have to see, where do government policies take us, because those are what have the greatest influences on that. Meanwhile, online, sometimes the government doesn't have that same influence, as things are left up to private companies.
These topics definitely aren't easy to talk about, and there is no one definite solution that can fix magically all of our problems. But it is important for us to understand and be aware of the issues surrounding our society in terms of either immigration and asylum seekers and the freedom of speech. Although the process to achieving change is difficult, but it doesn't mean that we should lose our hope, and it definitely does not mean that we shouldn't try. That brings us to the end of our podcast. See you next time. Bye!